me.
You know, obviously.
That's right.
I got Dave here.
I think that
You know, we want to welcome everybody here.
Speaking of that,
Celinda. You know, we want to welcome everybody here.
Everything all at once?
Everything all at once.
It's honestly a sensation.
Aliens listen to it.
Normally stream them, or is this?
we just started doing
We just
it a few
started
episodes
streaming.
ago.
Yeah, nobody's really been watching very much on the live streams, but people have been watching the YouTubes a lot. So hopefully people will start to check out the live streams more as we keep doing them. And I don't know, as we change times, maybe there'll be certain people that want to check stuff out at different times. And we'll just see what's going on, you know?
Cool.
Yes, so welcome to the show, Nina Cruz, Carolina Cruz, author of The Unwanted Prophet.
That's me. Yeah. Nina is a nickname I gave myself when I was really tiny because I didn't know how to say my own name. But it's actually Carolina. It's
Carolina, not Carolina.
No, yeah. But don't worry, everyone does that. It's totally...
It's spelled like Carolina, you would
It
think.
is. Yeah, no, it's Spanish. My dad's Puerto Rican.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. But Carolina, I dig
Yep.
it. Nina for
Thanks.
short. Welcome to the show. We're so
Thank you.
excited to have you. Me and Dave read your book, and we
Yeah.
are super excited to talk about it and get into it.
Cool.
Set a new record for, I was telling Tony when I read it, it took me like 4.5 days to read the whole thing.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm a pretty avid reader, and he was like, oh, you know, get the book. I was like, don't worry, I will have plenty of time to read this. And then like 4 days later, I was like, this shit, I like this shit. This was an awesome book. I'm done with it. He was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I took my time a little bit more on it. It took me a couple weeks to finish, and but I did enjoy it. I liked it a lot.
I'm glad.
It was very enjoyable. Dave blew through it. It's like a pretty big book too, 450 pages.
It's 150,000 words around about.
150,000 words.
Yeah. And yeah, around 532 pages, including like maps and table of contents and stuff. But I've been told it's an easy read, and
Yeah.
I keep hearing that, which is good, because when I had initially, they give you little guidelines. I'm entirely like self-published and everything, so I had to do all the research myself. And one thing that I saw pretty often was that, a fantasy novel is somewhere from 70,000 to 100,000 words. And I'm like, oh yeah, totally. Let me check my word count when I finished my first draft, and it was like 140,000. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot. So I thought I maybe should tone it down. But
Cut it up a little bit.
Cut it up a little bit, but I couldn't figure out anything to cut out, any way to, because it's broken up into 3 parts. Each of those 3 parts are around 50,000 words. So I thought, well, maybe I could chop each part up into its own individual part, but that just didn't feel right, so.
Yeah, I didn't feel like it was an overly wordy book too, because sometimes I'm reading a book and I'm getting to like certain points where I'm just like, you know, do I really need like 3 pages of this, of like not nothing, but like really flowery wording and all this stuff to kind of show how skilled of a writer you are. I much prefer more concise stuff, and I didn't really feel like this was overly wordy.
Yeah, it was definitely concise, like heavy book, but not dense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it was very, very like. A lot of times with these bigger, longer books, like Tony was saying, you know, you end up with like a 3-page sentence that has like 47 metaphors in it, and it doesn't like move the plot line. I'm interested in that kind of stuff too, but like it's just so much more difficult to read.
Yeah, I like reading that stuff just fine, but only when skilled authors do it. And personally, like, as much as I feel very proud of this book, whenever I try to write what's called purple prose, I feel like I'm just coming off really pretentious and I'm trying too hard, and I'm like, I would rather just say this person went to that place than get too crazy about it. But yeah,
I'm like a very to the point kind of person, and I don't really like extra steps, but I do also appreciate it when it's done well, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
But this was really good, and it starts off very interestingly. You know, your person is in a tough situation and they become prophet really early, unwanted prophet. And literally an unwanted prophet, like very quickly in the book.
Yeah, I've heard other people say like that's one that's like I think a personal preference thing, because some people have been like, wow, there's like 3 whole chapters before the like inciting incident or whatever happens, and I'm like, that's true. We spend a lot of time in the like early stages, but I think it's all important. So a lot of other people have been like, oh, you dropped us right into the action, and I'm like, good, that's what I was going for.
I liked how, I mean, it was definitely caught me off guard, with the title of the book, and I figured it would be just a little bit further down the line, but I like how it was done, because it was like the action happened and then it was the journey, let's say, instead of like a very long journey to get to that point, and then the action,
I appreciate that it was like a surprise too, like right away. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like not only was the main character surprised by this whole situation, but I feel like the reader was also surprised by that, like early on.
Yeah.
And I like the way that she becomes a prophet too. Just kind of like, oh, well, I'm God. Poof. Now you're.
That's how he does things. I love the character of Gethin, the God in this world, because
right.
He's just a mess.
Yeah.
And I tried to keep both the reader and Quincy in the dark about as much as each other, because she doesn't know what's going on. She's clueless 90% of the time. And then Gethin, as much as he pretends that he knows what he's doing, he doesn't. So it ended up being a really funny scenario to me, almost, that like, oh yeah, God meets you and he's like, sup.
Yeah, here you go. Here's a bunch of powers.
I don't know what they do either. Have fun.
Yeah, lead my church, please.
Yeah, please. I'm begging you. And the church is like, no.
Yeah, they completely do not want this prophet at all, and they're really unpleased with his choice, like immediately.
Yeah.
Like right away. It's like, oh, you're supposed to be the leader of our church, but we're going to disrespect you and not give you any sort of say in anything. And that's also one of the things I liked about the book, is that like she starts off with this immediate like she kind of she's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy at first, Mm-hmm. They expect her to be like a hood rat and a failure and a piece of shit, and she kind of is not given any opportunities to really shine until later on in the book, when you're like, oh, okay, maybe this person might actually have some value to our church,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that go ahead.
I was just saying, she's like locked away. They're like very afraid of this new change too.
They're afraid of not just the new change, but I think one of the things that I tried to drive home is that they're afraid of how it will make them look, because their appearances are so important to them, and to be like, to tell the public, we have a prophet, is this person that got arrested
and murdered somebody in our church.
Yeah, that would be like that. The fact that they're lucky that it wasn't the original plan of having Wes be prophet, because that would have sucked for everyone involved.
Yeah, I always felt like, I don't know if this was an intention of yours, but it almost felt like kind of in jest, like with Gethin about not knowing. Mm-hmm. It's like he's like a god, so you assume a god is omnipotent,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, oh no, I'm not, I really don't know what's going on, and then like the way things unfold is it's very convenient.
Yeah.
How for him not knowing how everything's gonna unfold, that they just unfold in the ways that are most conducive to what he wants to have done.
I feel like he has a lot more of an idea that he lets on too.
Yeah, part of his way of handling things is he feels like if he told humans what he knows, then they would mess it up, like counterintuitively. Mm-hmm. Like if you tell someone what to do, then they worry about doing that too much, and then that doesn't happen.
Exactly.
So he's like, I'm not gonna tell you. You got to figure this one out on your own. Yeah,
he does offer a little bit of guidance, but for the most part, he kind of lets everybody figure out what's supposed to happen in it. And I like that it's like in a divine way too, almost. You know what I mean? Like he can take credit for these things coming about and changing without really like putting much guidance into it. You know what I mean? He just allows things to happen naturally as the way they are intended by God, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%, for sure.
I feel like the people in the church too really are like super pretentious. Like I feel like I've met like some spiritual leaders or gurus or whatever who think they have like everything figured out and they know everything and they are like the holier than thou and all this stuff, and the church really seems to embody that like idea to me.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a like what's the word I'm looking for? Evangelical, like Baptist scenario, and a lot of Quincy's story and a lot of the way that she is treated and interacted with is kind of how I was interacted with growing up, where I was not their idea of what a proper church-going girl should be.
Right.
So I got a lot of people were pretentious in very different ways, which I tried to reflect in the different priests that get a lot of speaking lines. It's just that everyone has their own reasons and their own projections that they're putting onto this idea of spirituality that is giving them this idea that they understand things more than the people who don't look like they understand things, if that makes sense.
I would have bet money. I know we're at the poker table here. I'm holding it. I would have. So I grew up Catholic. I would have bet any money. I was gonna ask if you grew up Catholic, because like the papal state vibes of this all the way up to like the head of the church, the ex-arch, and it's just like has that very like Catholicism feel about it for like the structure and the group think and the
laws and control.
The reticence to give up power, or to, a lot of what's going on in the world today, where there's been like the current pope that we have is making, the current pope that's out there, making tweaks to things that for generations and centuries were like viewed as absolutely not. It's in our Bible. And it just felt like very Catholic vibes, the structure.
Yeah. So I went to a Bible college, and while one of the things that I studied was church history, which focused a lot on Catholicism, and like the Crusades and like the way that the Catholic Church over time kind of was corrupted by greed and money, and what's the when you had to pay money to get out of purgatory?
Tithings.
Yeah,
Tithes,
it's got so that's like the kind of like that's kind of the inspiration for how this church over time became corrupt as well. Though some of it takes from like Judaism as well, and obviously evangelical Christianity. There's a lot of different influences, but most of them are from like that kind of area, because that's what I grew up in and am familiar with more than anything else.
And what's your spirituality like today?
This book is a big part of how I got where I am, because I started writing it while I was still in college. And it started kind of helping me deconstruct, and I think you can get a really good idea of where I'm at by looking at where Quincy and Gethin's relationship ends up with, which is the church sucks. The way they treated me sucks. But I don't think that that's because God told them to do that to me.
Right.
I don't think that God looked them in the eye and said, be a jerk.
Yeah.
I think that was 100% their own human actions. And while I'm not sure if I fully believe in a God anymore, if there is one, I don't think the church is acting the way he wants them to. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I found it kind of refreshing, a change of pace that this girl, that Quincy, the main character, it was like coming from no belief to full belief. I feel like a lot of the more progressive books you see, it's like the undoing of like I guess spirituality, like the religion, because like a lot of people are spiritual now, but it's found in like Eastern, or like native. It's not drawn from the like the main like patriarchal structure, and
Right.
I thought it was super.
It tends to be like a full rejection of like Christianity and everything that built up Christianity and the Christian God and all of that mythos and like stuff behind it. It tends to be a full rejection of that and swinging really hard into indigenous practices, Norse paganism. A lot of the people that I was friends with who deconstructed and wanted to stay spiritual went to completely different practices. And I totally respect that. Like, I get why you'd want to go away from that, but that's not been my journey as much.
Right. And I think that a lot of the core nature is good, you know. This basic spiritual principles behind Christianity or any real religion are all generally the same, and practicing those spiritual principles kind of leads people to a connection to a God of their own understanding.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. It's like the idea of, like, in Christianity, a personal relationship with God, where your experiences kind of define what that means to you. So yeah, I feel like that's another thing that, like, the church has kind of ruined, is this individuality and this kind of, like, fluidity in how you define your relationship with God, because they're more rigid and about following specific rules and whether or not you're allowed to do specific things or talk a specific way or look a specific way. They don't even know what those rules are half the time.
And I think it's difficult, like extremely, insanely difficult to change the status quo. And you know, throughout this book, it's kind of the same thing, because you touch on the fact that, you know, the people that are just getting started in their priesthood, let's say the younger ones, and
The people in training.
the people in training, and then maybe no spoilers, you know, but like maybe people that are further along in that journey. But you very much touch on the point that, you know, the younger ones, the ones in training, are like, those are the ones that are good, you know. They're in this for the right reason. And I feel like a lot of the times the people that get involved with religion on that level are super spiritual, and then like the groupthink, the structure just kind of like crushes them into this thing that nobody likes.
Right. And I like the one character who is not really attached to the church, but seems to be like one of the most spiritually knowledgeable and kind and good-hearted people. The person that I really see personify like the beliefs of spirituality, you know, like loving your neighbor and being kind to each other and looking out for the people who are downtrodden or less fortunate. And Quincy develops like a really strong attachment with this person, and I feel like that was a big influence in her and how she treats people, and her understanding that, like, hey, not everybody is out to get you because of this, or you know, working against you because you're the prophet. Now there are still people who want to support you and want to see what you're capable and able to do.
Yeah.
And that was a huge building point to me. I was really disappointed with that character later on in the book.
I love that character. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And she goes out on this mission, and it's like a combat mission against another religion, you know. And I feel like that also like personifies a lot of like old Christian beliefs, you know, like if you're not with us, then you're against us, you know, that kind of idea that if you're not on our team, then you're on the wrong team.
Like a Spanish Inquisition.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
You know, come to America and make everyone Christian or else type thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's, if you're not doing it the exact same way we're doing it. Not to say that, like, the group that they are going to is doing things in a good way, because they're definitely not. But
I kind of liked them.
yeah, no, well, what I liked is that I gave Quincy a moment, which I think is totally reasonable for her, where, given the way that she's treated by this other group, she takes pause and she's like, wait a minute. She's like, wait a minute, are these really the bad guys? Do I really need to, like, be against them? And she comes to the conclusion of yes, because of several different things. But, like, it would make sense to have that moment, since she arrives to this other group and they immediately see her for, like, who she is. It's very fun to, like, to do that, because I feel like that's a reasonable reaction from her.
Especially when they're supposed to be the bad guys.
Yeah.
And I personally, I kind of found them endearing in that they are trying to end suffering for people that are struggling, and saying that death would be better than people going through these harsh realities of the world, which I find a lot of empathy with, you know what I mean? I understand that, like, certain people, maybe not the people that they're taking care of or helping
Right.
get out of these situations, but there are certain people that probably would be okay or appreciate the end to their suffering.
They're very sincere in their beliefs. Like, they 100% believe that what they're doing is right.
And I think that they, I love the dualities that pop up in this book. You know, I always wonder, because I write myself, like, how much of it is, like, intentional or just kind of happens as you're going along. And the thing that I found fascinating about this part of the book was, like, the opposing group is just, like, they're young, they're vigorous, and it's like, okay, they're young, they're vigorous, countercultural, like, this is supposed to be, like, the way that the power structure is supposed to be usurped, you know? Mm-hmm. And then she makes a decision that doesn't go in line with that, and it made me think in my head, like, okay, what was, like, the jaded, not the jadedness, like, the just being young and having different ideas doesn't necessarily make that the correct way to change things.
Yeah, Quincy's kind of point of view, I can speak mostly from her perspective on this, because she's whose, like, mind I was in at the time. Quincy's perspective is that the problems that are happening within this main church are long-standing and predictable, and she has ideas as to, like, she's very familiar with them and knows what those problems are. The problems with the other group are new, and they're more present and more unpredictable and more violent. Everything they do is a little bit, like, their theology is unfamiliar and less well thought out. It's very new theology. Their actions are very extreme. It's like, if this is the way to change things, is that not going to just bring up a whole new set of problems? Like, a whole new set of problems that might be way worse than using the position that she's in with the more familiar structure. So
right. And I feel that way a lot about certain things, like in our current government and current churches and all of these structures of power. Like, is it better to completely uproot the old plant, or can we save it and adapt it and change it into something that's more consumable to us? Sustainable, consumable, whatever the choice may be. Like, sometimes I feel like we need to start from scratch.
I felt like I got major, and I'm fascinated by the 60s, and, like, you know, I've been doing a lot of reading in that era lately, and I just got major, like, Abby Hoffman vibes off of the leader of the cult group, and it just made me think of, like, what you were saying, you know, like, almost like the the anti-Vietnam groups and the counterculture in the 60s, you know, when peace didn't work, then it was time to be violent. But how much does violence really get you but, you know, restarting the same cycle with different people in charge?
Right. And
exactly.
There's always the old, like, trope of, like, in order to kill the monster, I have to become the monster.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was, like, something that, while, like, it did occur to me, and I have a lot of, like, alternate storylines in my head, points that in the book she could have made a different decision that would have changed the entire rest of the book. So there are a couple points. First, early on, if things hadn't happened in the prison the way they did, and plans had gone on and Wes had been prophet, I have, like, a whole, like, well, what would have happened then? And then I also have, what if she had done the other, like, option when presented with this, like, cult? What if she had, like, gone along with them? What would have happened then? And I don't know, because the other big thing about Quincy, as much as I love her, is she is not super theologically smart. She is presented, one of the other characters calls her out on this. She is presented with a lot of information that is theologically complicated, and has a lot of philosophy and spirituality going on in it. And her usual solution at the moment, because she's kind of simple-minded, is what is going to keep people from dying right now. And then another character learns about the saint theology and asks her opinion on it. And she's like, oh, I didn't really think about that. And he's like, yeah, it's because you're stupid.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, if she were to have done what she was asked to do with the cult and taken that position, I don't know if she wouldn't have just become a pawn again. Because the other members of that group are much more theologically smart than her. And she probably would have ended up being used as a weapon again. She had more genuine allies by the end of the book on the other side of things.
Right. And I think that if she was to take that position, I really like that you're, like, not only world building in this whole situation, and it's a pretty big world. They travel to a few different places and spend a good time traveling. You're, like, also multiverse building and, like, separate timeline building.
Yeah, I have
this whole process.
I have a lot of ideas for that. Obviously, none of them are going to get put down on paper, but there's a lot of things I like to think about because I think it helps me build an idea of who the character is. Especially in Quincy's case. So.
And you always gotta have options too. Like, I feel like if I just picked one plan right from the beginning, and whenever I have picked one plan right from the beginning and tried to go from that plan, I never, like, set out or had, like, any options when things would change, you know what I mean? I always had to divert or go a different direction and move around and kind of shape the experiences in my life to the obstacles that were coming towards me. So it's good. I feel like it's probably a good thing that you're, like, exploring other options while you're writing.
Do you, when you're writing, like, the process just fascinates me. I love hearing how different people do it. Is it more like a stream of consciousness type thing? Do you, like, in your head, you're like, okay, this is the route I'm gonna go? Or are you like, okay, well, if Wes is gonna be the prophet, then you start writing it out and you get to a point and you're like, oh, okay, well, this is like, this doesn't just vibe as well with me, so I'm going to go back in the other direction. Do you just stick with one and write it out, or you kind of write different ways and then choose?
Yeah, so especially with this initial one, because I am now, I finished a second one and I'm working on a third. The second one will be out next year sometime. I'm getting it edited and stuff. But so now I know I can finish more than one. That's nice. But with the first one, this actually brings me to the origin of this book because it's relevant. But it was National Write a Novel Month 2017, and I was working on a different project that I had plotted meticulously, beginning to end, and I had all the scenes laid out and everything, and except for like one or two parts. And I got really bored because I knew everything that was going to happen, and I just didn't feel like writing it. So I decided to start with, like, a character in a prison and just go from there. I had a bunch of the world-building stuff that ends up in this book in a bunch of other different projects that I was like, oh, this would be specifically the church was from a completely different project. And I was like, oh, this would be a good place to put the church again, and oh, this would be a good place to put this country that I've been working on and stuff. So it started out with just Quincy in the prison, and then it was almost like how Minecraft generates, like everything kind of spreads out from there. It was like, well, there's a character in a prison cell. Where are the other prison cells? Who's in them? Where is this prison? What world is it in? What are the governing? And then it kind of spread out a little bit from there. And similarly, the plot did the same thing, where I was like, I wrote the plot out a little bit. I caught up with where I had written to, and then I was like, well, from this point on, what can happen next? And I've learned that that's pretty consistently how I do things, is I will plot out a few scenes in advance, and then I will write up until, like, maybe a couple scenes before where I'm done. And then by that point, because I'm very stream of consciousness, like you were saying, by that point I'll have introduced details in the scenes that I was writing that give me new ideas for what can happen later on. So I have had a couple times where I've gone down a scene path and I was like, this is just not working for me for whatever reason, and I've pulled it back to a major decision point and been like, we're gonna do something else.
So when you're about to start writing, do you have, like, any sort of process that leads you up into it, or is it just something you kind of hop into?
I have a lot of playlists. I have so many playlists. I have a playlist for each major book. I have a couple that are like, I have a character in my next book that is a musician. And so I have, like, a playlist that's like, oh, this is songs that they would like if they heard them. And then once I have playlists, I'll go on Pinterest and I'll look at, like, different pictures for inspiration. But usually the playlists are the most important thing. I feel like they really help set the tone for both, like, before I start a full story and also, like, before I sit down to, like, physically start writing.
How much does it bleed into other things you're doing in life? Like if you're at your job or, you know, at a social interaction, is it like the hours that you set yourself for writing, you just kind of, you know, mainly dedicated to there, or is it like, you know, you get a thought while you're at work and it's just like you, because this will happen to me, you just like block everyone out, like you're just like, I have to keep this in my head until I can write it down? I will like immediately, like the first thing is I'm blessed to have coworkers. One of my coworkers has read my book, the others have heard me talk about it a lot. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'll like bounce ideas off of them, which is really nice. They'll be like, oh my god, I have this idea for this thing, but I don't know how to do it, and they will be like, well, what if you did this? And I'm like, that's a terrible idea, but what if I did this instead?
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I have a Google Docs. My plotting document is a mess. Mm-hmm. I have just Google Docs, and half of it is like really structured outline, and then at the bottom is just this like vomit of like different ideas. I get different places and throwing them in just so that I don't forget them, because I know I will. Mm-hmm. My absolute favorite thing, though, is when I think I've come up with an entirely original idea, I put it at the bottom of the word vomit pile, and then when I'm about to write, I go through the whole thing, and it's like already in there once before. I'm like, well, that would have been nice to know. That's why I have to read it every time I start writing.
I do that a lot when I'm buying clothes. Like, I'll end up buying like the same thing over and over again. I'm like, oh, this looks really nice. I like that. And then I like get home and look in my closet, and I already have like the same exact thing like sitting in there somewhere.
Literally, it's exactly like that. Yeah.
It's like I just got an image for you of I'm gonna date myself a little bit from like the Osbournes, you know, when they were on TV and stuff, and you look at Ozzy's closet and it was just all black. Yeah. It was the same exact outfit like 75 times, and I'm imagining that's what your closet is like.
The one time when this really like came to me, or I realized that this was going on, I was on a trip to California, and I was in this cool store called Superdry, and I was looking at all the stuff, and I picked out like the outfit that I picked out that I was gonna buy. I was literally wearing it.
No,
it was like green bomber jacket, tiger t-shirt, and I picked out a green bomber jacket with a big tiger on the back of it.
Oh my god! You're like, this is sick. This would look great. I wonder where I get these ideas.
Yeah, and then I look in the mirror and I'm like, oh, I'm actually wearing that right now.
You're like, I'd be the flyest son of a bitch. Oh wait, I already am.
Yeah, dude, beat myself to the chase.
Oh my god.
That's funny when that happens, though.
Yeah. No.
And so, do you think that you like start with a character first?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 100%.
Are they people that you know?
No, I used to do that when I was in high school, and I was like writing like contemporary like stuff. I was writing like a lot of young adult stuff, which never finished it. It's never people that I know. It is people that might resemble kind of archetypes that I've experienced throughout my life. Like, I would say that each of the priests, again, kind of represent like different kinds of people I've interacted with in my life as a like Christian in the church. Quincy, I would say, is, if anything, based off of me, just kind of, again, because of my experiences. Also, she is slightly artistic. She clearly has ADHD. Someone called her a smart, sensitive woman with ADHD in a review.
Brat.
And I'm like, where is she smart? Point to it on the page. But yeah, no, like, I'd say that she's very much based off of me. Marlo has a lot of elements that I've experienced, like, and then, you know, some of the more minor characters, I guess, are based off of people I know. Some of the characters that you meet in Act 3 that are, like, kind of jovial, like, people are based off of my cousins in Puerto Rico. A lot of them share names with my cousins. So, yeah, but most of the main characters are based off of, like, more, like, archetypes.
I think that Quincy's smart in the aspect that she is simple, and I think that spirituality, when it's right and when like things work well generally in the world, they are simple. And she has these big revolutions that, from seeing something simple or something small or a detail or whatever, she has these remarkably good way of like making them simple and making them understandable and making them practical instead of these big lofty ideas that are like that other people try to profess and like pass off as like highbrow spirituality or highbrow whatever, you know, thinking. And really it's just something that's super simple and super plain and practical and easy to use and easy to understand.
She seems to, where she might be lacking in like the book smarts where like Marlowe has them, she's definitely intuitive.
Yes.
So this was a quick, back to the character thing real quick, because this is interesting to me. How you pick the names? How you come up with the names?
Yeah. So Quincy's name was before anything else in the book existed, which is why it's kind of out of line with a lot of the others. I actually didn't... This is interesting to go back to stream of consciousness. I didn't know that she was biracial until the conversation that she has with the Exarch, where the Exarch remarks on her like given name, her birth name being in a different language. And I was like that was a moment to me where I was like, oh my god. I'm like, oh my god, she's biracial. I have to like fix all of my drawings, because she was not in the original art that I did of her. But other than that, so Quincy's name is that on its own. But I usually, for each country, I know a general like comparison that I can make to the real world. So specifically, the southern country of Anjeon is based off of Korea, vaguely.
They use chopsticks.
They do use chopsticks, yeah. They use chopsticks. And then Lucian is based off of the Caribbean, which is where a lot of my family is from, and I've spent a lot of time there, and I really love like that like culture. But the reason that all of the names are like French or Hispanic is because they speak Portuguese, is because I tried to figure out how to write down Caribbean Creole, and it's very hard to do. So I was like, I'm just gonna have them speak Portuguese, and hopefully that'll work. Some of the names I chose because they have specific meaning that matches the character's personality. A lot of the time it's 100% just because I think it feels right.
I was just about to ask that. You know, when I write like when I try developing characters, like sometimes I'll just, you know, it's an extension of yourself when you write, even if it's total fiction. You know, it's your art, you create it from nothing. And sometimes I'll just be like writing out a character that's just totally made the fuck up in my head, and I'm like, this is a disingenuous name. Like, I made it up, but you know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah.
This is not a Frank thing to do, you know? Like,
Exactly. No, 100%. Yeah, I'll definitely feel that. Like, I think most of the time, the only character, Marlowe was a character that I had a dream where I was like in a like, there was an arson investigation going on, and they had this eccentric detective that was there, and he was questioning everyone, and he got to me and I made fun of him, and so he said, we're skipping you, we'll come back, and then he just kept going. And in the character, the dream, the character was named Martin, but I had a person that I knew that was writing a book, and his main character's name was Martin. And I was like, I need this character to be in my book, I love him too much, but I can't name him Martin, so I just changed the end of the name, and that's why he's named Marlowe. But yeah, most of the time it's just the feels, the vibes have got to be right.
And you draw all your characters.
Most of them. Some of them have never gotten a drawing because I just don't want to.
that makes sense.
I guess so. Do you feel like that helps your creative process in identifying with the character and like giving them a little bit of a personality and a flair through art before you put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard?
I think that it's really interesting because I've often thought about, like, there are characters who I draw that I've never written. There are characters who I write who I'll never draw. I feel like they're like tantamount to each other. Like, they're both very important, but neither of them are necessary for the other to work for me. I've thought about this before. I don't think I'll ever stop. If I were to like stop, it's compulsory. Like, yeah. I gotta do it. There is no part of me that is doing it for any purpose other than I have to. So, you know, it all comes and goes in ways where it's like, sometimes, usually it'll be because I'm like really feeling a character. Like, it comes and goes in waves. So sometimes I will not draw Quincy for months. Mm-hmm. I will not just be in her mood, I guess. And then one day I'll be like, oh my God, I miss Quincy, and I'll listen to her playlist, and I'll just have all these scenarios for her, and all of these things, relationships I want her to be in, and like scenarios that I'll never write that I wish that she would be in, and then I'll just draw a lot of her, and then it'll be a different character next month.
Do you think it could ever be like some kind of side story, adjacent story from like the main plot that you're going along here, you know, down the line a couple years, there's just a random Quincy story that just doesn't have anything to do with the main
Maybe
plot,
like a short
but it's her
little novella or something
I'm
like
thinking like how Star Wars, you know, has so many offshoots in different directions.
Yes. So actually, the sequel that I'm writing is a completely different main character, completely unrelated to this book, in a different continent that we didn't visit in this book, but in the same world during the same time period. I also, and this is more to answer your question or talk about what you were talking about, I guess. My biggest thing that I've already started just completely by accident because it kept happening, and then I was like, oh, maybe people will want to read these, is I will have characters that never come, that I'm like, oh, it would be cool if there was this character in this world. I'll write like a 2,000-word short story, and I won't have anything to do with it. And this has happened several times. It's happened with Quincy a couple times. It's happened with characters that aren't in this book. So my plan is, once the trilogy is finished and out into the world, I'm going to compile and just make sure that they're like canon compliant, like everything makes sense. I'm going to compile those into like an anthology series, or like one big anthology of short stories, and put that out as well.
Does this world have a name?
Yeah, this world is called Beira, which means edge in Portuguese, because all of the countries are coastal. And so, yeah, I don't know if there is a greater name for, like, the planet that it exists on,
Right.
but as far as the conglomeration of all of the, like, countries that I have created.
So it would be like a Beira short stories
Yes.
compilation.
Yeah. Yes, it would.
Cool.
So this is kind of like off the subject of the book a little bit, but so you got a trilogy going. What's the mountaintop of trilogies? Like, when you think of trilogy, what is the best that there could be? Anything, like, if it's in books or movies or whatever.
Okay, so this I think this also kind of shows like why I'm doing such a disjointed kind of trilogy here, where we're following completely different characters. The director Mike Flanagan made 3 Netflix TV shows: The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and Midnight Mass. And those 3 TV shows together are the best group of things I've ever watched. All of them are masterpieces. All of them address grief and religion, and they do haunting and ghost and gothic stories in different ways, and all 3 of them together have very different strengths, and I think make a really cohesive, like, group of stories that I think if you like one, you'll like all 3 of them, you know, and that's kind of like what I would say I would call the best trilogy ever for me.
Nice. What about you?
Oh man, best trilogy. I would probably, off the top of my head right now, if I could think about this more, it might be a little bit different. But off the top of my head right now, I'm saying episode 1, 2, and 3, and episode 1 kind of sucks. Of Star Wars.
Yeah. So wait, are we talking like episodes 1, 2, and 3, the prequels?
Yes.
Okay.
Because that was when I was growing up. That was what I loved Star Wars. Like, I love the Clone Wars. I love Anakin in general. He kind of sucks in the first one, but I love Clone Wars Anakin, and I love Return of the Sith Anakin. I think that's what it's called.
Revenge of the Sith?
Revenge of the
Yeah.
Sith Anakin. He's one of my favorite characters, and I've always had, like, a huge soft spot for, like, the anti-hero.
That's valid.
And the people that are, like, corrupted through power and control and all of these outside forces, because at heart he's like a genuine, kind, nice person. He wants to save the person that he loves. Like, he's motivated to save Padme more than anything in the world, and to go, and it brings him to like extreme lengths to try and do that, you know. And I understand that, and I appreciate that, because I feel like that's an easy thing to get behind. At least for me, I can understand that as a person, like really reaching for a goal and maybe going down the wrong route to attain that goal.
Yeah, as a romantic, I really love the like idea of a character who will become kind of this like monster to this incredibly powerful, unstoppable person to protect and save the one that they love. I have a lot of problems with prequels personally, but I do like that kind of story and that arc a lot. And all of my problems are purely personal.
Right. Yeah.
See, if I got to pick one, it's the Back to the Future trilogy.
Ooh.
That's an interesting
It's
choice.
not even close. It's not even close for me. And I mean, there's plenty of other great trilogies out there, but I love the whole concept of like one instance in your past, how much it can drastically change everything in your present. You know, and the comedy's great too. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, I love Michael J. Fox and, you know, Christopher Lloyd, and not so much Biff. I don't remember who plays Biff. He was kind of a dick, but
Classic.
but just like, you know, like if you hit the bully, you know, and then
Instead of walking away.
Instead of walking away or cowering, like 30 years later, like you own a multi-million-dollar business and he's your mechanic instead of him just still bullying you 30 years later in the same small hometown, or like a little more outrageous, but you know, you get a sports almanac with all of the results for the next 50 years. You go from being that mechanic to being, you know, the richest person on the face of the planet. And I don't know, just the whole dynamic of it is fascinating to me. Plus, plus I like the lulls in it too. Like, I like laughing when I watch movies. So,
Yeah, absolutely. What other authors inspire you?
Yeah, my biggest inspiration is an author named Brandon Sanderson. He does a lot of fantasy stuff, a lot of long-form fantasy stuff like this. Specifically, I think my favorite from him is called Warbreaker. It's one of his few standalones. But he's better at magic than I am. He does some really cool magic systems, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, like levels of like intricate, makes sense magic systems, and I just cannot wrap my head around that. And then who else would I say?
I was getting a lot of Neil Gaiman vibes.
Oh my
He's one
God.
of my favorite. I love American Gods. That's probably one of my top 5 books of all time. And me and Dave are in a book club, and we just read this book called Library at Mount Char, and I got a lot of the same vibes from that book as I do from this. I can't remember who writes it right now, but it was also one of my top 5 favorite books. I love these like spiritual, like what is God, how is God created type books.
So Neil Gaiman, this is gonna sound really like weird and a little like maybe crazy, but there are certain people like that I've never met, that I've never spoken to, that we grew up in completely different times, and I feel like there's just some understanding of the world. Something has caused us to understand the world in a really similar way. And Neil Gaiman, specifically Sandman, and then the movie Stardust is based off of, I think,
One of his books. Yeah,
one of his
I read
books
it.
as well. I haven't read the book. I've read the first volume of Sandman. I've watched the series, and
I loved the series. I read the book too, long time ago though, when I was, I barely remember it because it was so long ago.
yeah.
But I really enjoyed the book, and I love the TV series.
It was so good. It was such a good adaptation. But between that and like Stardust and Good Omens, I'm seeing a repetition of this kind of like relationship between this otherworldly being that is beyond time and beyond human perception, and then humans, and this kind of like this love and this kind of curiosity between the two parties as they get to know each other that I see repeated in Gaiman's work a lot, and obviously it's in this book, and it will be repeated in the next 2 books as well, because I just love it so much. And I hadn't read Sandman or Good Omens or seen Stardust when I wrote this book, so then I'm watching these things and I'm like, it's not enough that I'm like, oh no, I've ripped Neil Gaiman off, but it is enough that I'm like, wow, something about us, we view humanity very similarly, and I think that's really interesting.
Right, and I think that's a really interesting thing about humanity, is that like sense of connection and that sense of like almost divine connection where you do see things like on a same level and reach the same kind of revelationary moments, you know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of times throughout my life where I've come to an understanding of something and then later read it in like a book or from some other person or a philosopher or a religious leader or whatever is saying the same things that I've kind of realized on my own personal level. And I think that the more that we're able to connect with those types of moments, the more we're able to connect with each other and gain like a better understanding.
Yeah, it's kind of like the positive side of like there is no such thing as an original thought. And a lot of people take that really discouragingly, but honestly, I think that's just like we're all human and we all share experiences. So of course we're all going to have similar ways of looking at the world in one way or another.
We all pull from the same well of the collective consciousness.
Right. And I always tell people that I'm just a parrot whenever they're like, oh, I liked what you had to say, or like that was interesting or whatever. I'm like, oh, I'm just a parrot. I'm just saying what I've read somewhere or heard somewhere before. So don't give any credit to me. It's just that tapping into that well. And you're the second author that we've had on, and the second author that's mentioned some sort of intervention on a spiritual level or a divine intervention or some sort of inspiration that comes to them from somewhere that they don't understand. And being able to tap into that inspiration, I feel like, is very much a talent and very much a skill that people can learn to harness and use for positive things.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And it's interesting to see how people get into those portals and reach those revelations on a completely different level and all come to the same kind of conclusion.
It's the simplest way of trying to break down the complexities of the human experience.
Yeah, that's why fantasy and fiction are like so important to me. Like my dad's been very kind of, no offense to him, but he's not super a fiction or fantasy person. And he has always kind of like, whenever my brother and I would like have these really intense conversations about the themes of like these comics we were reading and like how these characters treated each other and how that made us feel, my dad would be like, you are spending way too much brain space on this.
Yeah.
He'd be like, don't you have like school that you could be occupying that like part of your brain with? And we'd be like, you don't understand.
Do you think it's easier for you to write in the realm of like fantasy, science fiction-y type stuff than something that might still be fiction but like based more in reality, like the real world we currently live in?
Yeah, because I find that like using like fictional like fantasy gods as like kind of, first of all, as metaphors for like the real world religions. In this case, one of the reasons that I really wanted to do this story in fantasy, because this story, like not beat for beat, but like a similar story could be told set in modern America or set in, this book is all kind of based off like 1600s adjacent like stuff. But the immediate problem with that is one of my beta readers for this book, one of the first people I was sending chapters as I was writing, came back to me on like chapter 4 and was like, this is bad theology. She was a Christian. She's like, this is bad theology. And I'm like, it's a fantasy religion.
Right.
I'm sorry. She was mad at me for saying that you can be part of a religion and then stop being part of that religion, because in evangelical Christianity that is not something you can do. Once you are baptized, technically you can never stop being a Christian, and if you decide to stop being a Christian, that means you were never really one, you were just faking it the whole time, which is a really harmful kind of message to give people like me who were like so involved in the church and like bathing yourself in it. It was your whole life, and then one day you crack under the pressure of like all these expectations of you, and you're like, you know what, I've given it a lot of really hard thought. I don't think I identify with this religion anymore. And then everyone in that religion who watched you beat yourself up for decades is like, oh, so it was all fake. It's like, you know firsthand that it wasn't. So with her, I just stopped sending her chapters. because I was like, you are thinking too hard.
See, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm like more of a spiritual adventurer and looking for that spiritual high. And like I've talked about, I'm sure I was baptized as a child because my parents are both Christian. But I thought about like I don't really go to church right now. But I thought about just going to get baptized just for like the spiritual experience of like committing myself to some sort of religion. I also, my friend invited me to come take like the Muslim version of the baptism, and I was like, sure, I'll come do it. Like, but also, my personal thing is like, am I being disrespectful just by chasing this spiritual experience and not really committing to the aftermath of it? And like, it's really easy for me to commit to a lot of like the basic Christian principles or like any religion's principles, because they're all generally good and they're all generally about, you know, loving yourself and loving your neighbor and treating people the way that you want to be treated, you know, following the golden rule. But am I being disrespectful by taking this so lightheartedly and just like looking for something that's an enjoyable and pleasant experience for me rather than giving it the weight or the thought that a lot of other people do, because it's a very serious commitment to a lot of people. And not that I wouldn't take it seriously, but is it something that I really identify enough to make that commitment, or am I making light of it?
I think it's everybody sees things differently, and I think being able to sit down and have a conversation is what really matters. Because, you know, I had an experience with me and you actually years ago. We went to a Buddhist temple. Temple is temple Buddhist temple out in Cleveland, and you know, I was like adventuring. You know, I was like, hey, this isn't my thing. And then a few years later, kind of like a counterpoint to your story for how I feel about things, I was with another friend, and we're in Woodstock, New York, and it was like this great like collection at this Buddhist temple up in the mountains of like Dalai Lamas, whatever, and they had, you know, they like a gift shop and stuff, whatever, but they had the temple, and my buddy was a Buddhist, but he had some like anxiety, and he was like, come in the temple and pray with me. I said no. He's like, I'm real nervous. I said, you're a Buddhist, right? He said, yeah. And I said, well, go in and do it. He's like, well, why won't you do it with me? And I said, because I don't believe it. Like, I'm not going to, in my head, I'm like, I'm not going to disrespect these people, because I'm not just going to do it just to, like, go in a temple and bow down. And you know, but to be able to sit down and have the conversations without ripping each other's head off about it, even though we see it differently, I think is the only way we really can hit that point of spirituality where we can really help each other. You know,
and have that mutual respect for each other and their religions and the things that we're practicing, rather than trying to say, you know, my God is the right God, or my way of doing things is the right way, and having that level of acceptance and compassion for one another.
I think there's a level of respect you need to have for, like, this is my personal, like, to get back to that, this is my personal view on it. Is I have my way of doing things, everyone has their own way of doing things, specifically because everyone works at their own pace too. Like, I started writing this in 2017, I still identified as a Christian at the time, I still was going to a Bible college, I still largely recognized all of the like things that I had been taught. So this has been an experience as I addressed my like sexuality, as I addressed my gender, as I addressed like things about me that were not congruent with what I'd been told to be growing up. I slowly started moving further and further away, but it's been 5 years, and that's been a long time. And I've had people in my life who have deconstructed maybe a little faster, who have come to a very different conclusion than me. And I totally, like, they have their way of doing things, I have my way of doing things. We all have our own personal, like, paces, whether it be being extremely spiritual across several different like recognized religions, or being not spiritual at all and just accepting that maybe you don't know anything and maybe that's okay. Like, as far as I think basically what we've all come to in different ways of saying it is like, you know, you do you right. As long as you are respect and having those conversations, because that's what's really important to me, is like knowing where the person I am with is at, because otherwise it's like, well,
yeah, do I know you at all?
Yeah.
And I think that's why works like this, books like this are so important, where you can take a very rigid, not rigid, maybe not rigid's not the right word, but a very like structured, not structured either. A very it's like a hot button issue type thing. Like, how many times do you hear people say, like, we can talk about anything but religion and politics? And, like, you get something like this where it's a fantasy, and obviously it incorporates things that happen in this world. But since it doesn't have that label of one specific thing that exists as we do, you can sit around and talk about it from different angles.
Yeah.
And I think having those, like, soft approaches through art into,
I think it's so important.
It's so important into the difficult things. Like, I think that's the most important thing about the humanities, is being able to like soften the blow of getting into the very rigid, there's where I wanted to use it, the very rigid, like difficult things like philosophy and political structure and where do we go when we die type stuff.
Right.
And it's like a beautiful way to get into it.
Yeah, and it also, this is something I was saying, I've said a lot, so you guys know this, I have my book up for sale at the coffee shop that I work at, and so people...
Go get her book at Ember and Forge.
Get it at Ember and Forge, it's there.
Get it.
And it's cheaper there than it is on Amazon. On Amazon, it's $12.99, and then I sell it for $10 because I don't have to pay royalties to Amazon. But having it on display like that, this book is really personal, and so like even just having it where people can look at the cover, much less read the whole thing and then come back and find me and talk to me about it. People can look at the cover, they can look at the back, they can turn and look at me, and then they can look back again, and they're making all these judgments.
Right, you got a little sign up there. It's like a little game. Like, talk to the author. She has red hair. There's a little picture of you.
Yeah, but like that has led people to make judgments about the book that they might not have made if they couldn't see me, or make judgments about me that they might not have been able to make if they couldn't see the book. I've had people several people have asked me if the book is satanic.
Nice.
And I'm always like, no. Someone
He is the god of death.
Someone told me I should answer with, I've sent him my copy, but to like get his official endorsement, but he hasn't replied to my email yet. But someone asked me, this Scottish lady came up to me as I was like making her cappuccino or whatever, and she's like, I saw your book over there, and I'm like, yeah, and she's like, do you find yourself to be a believer? And I'm like, that is the most roundabout way anyone's ever asked me if I still was a Christian or not yet. And I'm like I literally was like a Christian? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, kind of. The book's about that and my relationship with the church. So, 7-year-old Scottish woman, maybe you shouldn't read it, but, it's such a vulnerability to like have myself out there like that. Because on one hand, you can read it and you can accept it as like this story about these characters. Like the way that people kind of view maybe like superhero media in a way that's like a lot of people just kind of latch onto the character for their power and personality. And you're like, oh, I love this little character. He's just like me for real. Yeah. And then on the other hand, there's a possibility, like with you guys, that someone will read it and they will see the themes, and I will have to, not like have to, but get to like address the things that I have put down in the only way that I knew how through this book, and then like kind of like readdress them again after. It's like I break them apart, jumble them, put them into the book, and then reassemble them on the other side with other people afterwards. So it's really interesting.
Have you had a lot of people come and ask you about the book being right there?
Yeah, so I've had some people come back and tell me they were reading it or were done with it. I have one regular who comes in and he calls it my tome, and he'll come in and he'll be like, I'm about 50% of the way through your tome, and I'm like, yeah, what do you think of it? He's like, I'm not telling you till I'm done. Last time I heard he was 80% done, so
nice.
Hopefully I'll get feedback on that soon. But yeah, and then I'll have people, this is my least favorite, I'll have people go to the About the Author section while I'm working. I don't see them doing this. They'll go to the About the Author section. They will turn to me without having said a word to me thus far, and they will say, so why'd you move out of Seattle? And I'm like, do I know you? It's terrifying. I'm like, who are you? And then I'm like,
How do
oh,
you
it's
know
right there.
about my life?
Yeah, and well, I feel like maybe that would happen everywhere, but when you fly in from our airport and the big sign says it's okay to love Erie, you know, I feel like Erieites are like, why did you come here? Yeah. Of all the places, you were in Seattle and you came here, why? No.
Or you see somebody here that's very successful and just like, why are you still in Erie?
Yeah.
You'd be
Yeah.
living anywhere you wanted and being successful and awesome.
Do you ever, because I know I've been there a few times, I go to the shop every once in a while and I see there's like the loaner copy there. Mm-hmm. Do you ever like find yourself when you're working like, you know, like looking at someone with the loaner copy and like trying to like read their face or something?
Yeah, no. I always like, it's so stressful. I wish I hadn't done this because I think it's really good. People have come back. It's done its purpose, which is that people will read it and then they'll come in. But my least favorite is someone will take it. They will sit down. They'll be reading it for hours. Like they will be in it. And I will like go over and I'll look and I'm like trying not to look too much. And then they don't buy it. And I'm like,
Oh, rejection.
my heart's like, maybe they'll come back and keep reading it later because they know it's here. Like, I don't want anyone to spend any money on this book if they don't want to. If they just want to experience the story, that is way more than enough. That's super flattering to me. But it's always like, oh, did you hate it?
It was that bad, huh? You read
Yeah.
for 2 hours and
And you just put it back.
You have to like stop yourself. You're like making a French press and you're just like, yo.
I'm like,
And he's walking out, they're walking out the
yeah,
door.
I'm
You're
like,
like,
yeah,
yo,
what do you think of it?
what are you doing? Where are you going?
I'll give you a copy.
you didn't like my book. What the heck?
Yeah, no, it's really putting myself out there. Someone said that to me once. They didn't pick up the book or read it or anything. They were just like looked at the display and looked at me. They're like, you wrote this? I'm like, yeah. They're like, way to put yourself out there. I'm like, geez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very brave. I mean, a lot of people have books or ideas and stuff that they never discuss or talk about or put like much, enough effort in it to like publish or do anything like really crazy. Well, not that what you're doing is really crazy, but it's definitely like an advanced step,
Yeah, well, so this is moot and not really that relevant, but I have a degree in marketing. That's what I went to the Bible college for. Is I got a degree in marketing while I was there. And so I feel like a lot of things that are scary to first-time authors, like putting yourself out there in a coffee shop, or like tweeting about it incessantly. Mm-hmm. A lot of that stuff is like not second nature to writers because writers and artists are a lot of the time by nature like kind of hermits. But luckily, since I have the degree, I feel like it's a lot more natural to me to be like, oh, no, like, you should read my book or whatever. I still get my coworkers harass me because I still clam up when someone's like, I'm going to buy it. I'll be like, yay, thank you. And my coworkers will, like, slide up next to me and be like, do you want her to sign it? Because I hate saying that. I'm like, I feel like so narcissistic doing that.
We were both hoping you would sign our book actually while you're here.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I totally will.
Awesome.
I just don't I hate volunteering that. I hate being like, I'll sign it for you because it's like, do you want me, your barista, to write in this book? But yeah.
I also feel like, at least with me in this podcast, like it kind of just falls out into like a lot of my conversations with my friends and family and like people in general. I just kind of word bomb it like, oh, I have a podcast, like this guest or this or that or whatever just happened recently, and but I'm sure it would be kind of a lot more intimidating doing that with like people that I don't really know,
Yeah, there's the fun part of like the thing is because it's about religion and because it's about my relationship with religion and because I'm still friends with a lot of people who are in those circles or have been in those circles. When that topic comes up and we'll be talking about like our relationship with the church and I'll say something and it'll occur to me that I worded it much better in my 150,000 word book. I will. Right. It's a common thing for me to like mid conversation about serious topics be like, oh well, I wrote a book about that.
Yeah.
But yeah. It is tough to like try and breach again a 150,000 word book to people and be like, yes, you should read this extremely long book. Why? Because I wrote it.
Right. And it gets annoying after a while too. It's like, why aren't people just listening to my fucking podcast? You know what I mean? This is my heart and soul pouring into this. Why isn't there a million people listening every week when we go live and all of this stuff and spamming all the social medias and stuff? Like, I just feel like people are probably just annoyed by this point, you know?
When I was in, me and Tony were at Barron at the same time together, and shouted, she, you know, self-deprecating here. Hopefully you're listening, and probably not, but our chief editor, Julia, was her name on the paper, and I wrote this great article in our April Fool's edition about
then silver nut, the
white-breasted nuthatch replacing the Nittany lion as like the mascot for Penn State. And I bring up the story because like it made the front page because people, you know, like the editor was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, of course this is getting the front page.
That was my idea too.
Yeah, and you know he had the idea for the bird, and then like I put all, you know, did the lead work, put all the writing into it, and then we had like our weekly like staff meetings with all the editors, and some of the writers would show up, and she like flips open the, you know, holds up the paper, and she's just laughing. She's like, white-breasted nuthatch. She's like, you know, how did you ever, why? And I was just like, well, if you read the fucking article, you'd know, Julia. And everyone just started laughing. She was like, fair point, you know. And I'm like, well, just fucking read it, you know?
Oh my God.
The white-breasted nuthatch was almost the official Penn State bird before they went with Nittany lion.
That's so
And I don't know
funny.
how I stumbled across that fact, but I told Dave, and then he wrote the article
That's
about
hilarious that it had a basis and everything. That's so good. Yeah, no, one time I was in one time I was in a Discord server that had like a bunch
We
of
have a
writers.
Discord?
Ooh, I'll have to join it.
Yeah, nobody uses
I'm a
it
Discord
other than
fiend.
me. And our biggest fan ever.
Yeah.
He's on our Discord.
He's on our Discord.
Yeah, join it. That'd be so cool.
Yeah.
There's pictures of your book all over it.
Oh my God. Terrifying. But yeah, one time I was in a Discord server that was specifically for a YouTube channel, and the YouTube channel talks about like tropes and stuff. So a lot of the people that are in it are writers, and there's a bunch of channels to like talk about your books and stuff. And so I was pretty new, and I was like, I put the synopsis in the like advertise yourself channel after I had felt like I had, you know, been involved enough to warrant that. And it's literally basically the back of the book. It's like, okay, so there's a criminal, and the death god makes her his prophet. And someone is like, why would a god of death do that? Like, what would his motivation possibly be? And I'm like, hey, I have news for you. You can read, it's out. I posted the link.
150,000 words about it.
It's literally $4 on Kindle. Like, literally, you can read it. Do you want me to write it out in Discord when you could just go buy the book? If you're so curious, because to me that sounds like interest.
Right.
Just go read it. So.
That weeds out the people that are feigning interest and the people that are also you know, actually interested. I'll have people like, you know, it's not a ton, but I'll have people come up to me now and be like, oh, I saw on Facebook, you know, you posted a link for a podcast. Yeah, what's it about? Well, click on it. Click on it and find out.
Listen to that shit.
Yeah, no, the good news is by having the sign that I've made at Ember and Forge, and that, like, yeah, having the sign up and just, it says what the book is. It's fantasy. It's about a death god. Who wrote it? Me. How much is it? $10. That's like the one thing that, especially for like smaller artists and authors, like the big things are to put up. And you guys do this, so it's like, why is everyone confused? It's like, what is it? If it costs money, how much money does it cost? And where can you find it? That is the big things you need to be posting every time you post. And like a lot of authors don't do that, but when you do that, it works because it answers any question anyone could possibly have that isn't going to be in the book. And that's ended up being the questions that people end up having to ask me about the book when they're standing there looking at it is, did you write this? Yes. And how long did it take you? Those are like the most asked question is, how long did it take you? And the answer is 3 years, but 2 of those were emailing my editor back and forth because we both had a lot going on.
Yeah. $10 is super cheap for such a good book too. Like, I don't think I've ever, well, there's probably a few used books that I've bought that were $10 or less that I've enjoyed about as much, but no brand new books probably that were $10 that I've enjoyed as much as your book. So
I appreciate that. The thing is, as a writer and as someone who's active with other writers, I know firsthand that a lot of people who are self-published are terrible. And it's asking a lot of people to spend money on a debut novel from a self-published author. It does help at the bookstore, or at the coffee shop, that people can flip through it and they can kind of get an idea of my writing style and know that, like, it's decent. It's not going to be the things that I've, like, seen very frequently in other small authors who publish. So there's that, but I do still feel like, you know, I am self-taught. This is my first book I've ever published, and I did everything myself. So it's like, I feel like I'm asking a lot of people to trust to spend any amount of money on that. And also $10 is really nice because it's a nice flat number, and sometimes people will just hand me a $10 bill and call it good. Which I think if I charged anything, like, if I were to change the price at this point, I would change it to $15, because I've found that, like, giving people a solid, like, it's the opposite of what they taught me in marketing class, that they use the 99 cents thing. It's like, no, people like it when they can just hand you an even number of money and then walk away.
Yeah. Instead of trying to scrounge out, like, if you an extra $2, like 12 instead of like 15 or 10. Nobody wants $1 bills back anyway. And
nobody wants pennies back either.
Nobody wants pennies back. Oh my God, I don't want pennies. That's for sure.
Not really. They'll go into my jar and I'll use them someday, maybe.
Yeah, I'll put them in I'll put them in the jar, and then I'll dump them into the change machine at Wegmans, and then we'll call it good.
See, I'm gonna save a couple of them because they're gonna end up just being obsolete eventually.
That's true.
And then they'll be collector's items. That's fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Right?
For on both the, like, collector's issue thing and also on the never having to use pennies again. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been super fun.
Yeah, it's been really, really fun. Thank you guys so much.
You've been a great guest, and we've appreciated this conversation. And once you get the second book comes out, obviously you're gonna have to come back on and talk with us about it.
Yeah, it's gonna be very different. So I'll be interested to hear you guys' thoughts once that's out next year at some point.
And we'll be excited to read it.
We certainly will. And you can find her book on Amazon or stop down at Ember and Forge, pick it up for $10. It's a great price, and it's definitely enjoyable and fun. Put that up in the camera. Get it. We're going to get some signed books here and have a super fun time. We love you all. Check us out on Discord or on Facebook.
That's what it looks like.
Everywhere. Yeah, bring it right up there, Dave. Good work. Way to be a fucking man on the job. We love you guys. Have a great night. Bye.
Bye.